Hello everybody, Major General Relativity here, and today, for this latest installment of the Reactor Craft series, we're going to talk about how to operate a fission reactor. So, what you want, or what you will need, is two things, technically. A fuel core and a steam boiler. So, in the fuel core, you'll put fuel in it, as we discussed in the last episode on fuel production. And then in the steam boiler, you're going to want to insert water. Technically, you can put it in with buckets, but if you're inserting water with buckets, why are you doing reactors? The best way to insert water is pumping it in through the bottom. Actually, that's the only way. The only way to pump water in is through the bottom. Right here, I'm just using a creative tank, but dew point aggregators, reservoirs from Ender.io, aqueous accumulators, whatever you feel like. And then it produces steam on the top once the steam boiler reaches 100 degrees Celsius. Now, if you harken back to episode 1 where we talked about the high temperature gas reactor, you can take the steam which comes out of the top here, this 24,000 cubic meters of steam, and run it through either a turbine or a high pressure turbine or a steam diffuser and do stuff with that, namely generate power. I'll be making a specific episode about power generation, so we won't... Oh, okay, I thought that was something else that's bad. I'll make an episode about power generation, and it will deal more with that. So, in just 1 minute, we'll resume when I'm ready to show how to operate a fission reactor. Alright, so in the last episode we talked about uranium fuel pellets and plutonium, so we'll start with inserting them into the fuel cores. 4 fuel pellets can fit in a fuel core. Note, how many fuel pellets you have in a fuel core at a time does not influence how much power, well, technically heat, it generates, or how fast the reaction rate is. All it means is that when one burns up, it could immediately move on to the next one. It creates a buffer, fancy stuff like that. So, when a uranium fuel pellet or plutonium fuel pellet is put in it, it will emit neutrons to the right, to the left, front, and in back. It does not emit them up or down. So they'll fly out and they'll try to hit another fuel core with fuel in it. And when that happens, it will trigger a fission reaction, which will generate some heat and more neutrons. Now, if you have only one fuel core in a reactor, which won't really work that well, you'll need neutron reflectors, which bounce neutrons back from where they came. It has about a 25% chance of doing so. Although with a larger fission reactor, neutron reflectors will just greatly improve your neutron economy. It'll get more out of your fuel. It'll increase the reaction rate, meaning that you need less fuel cores per steam boiler, shrinking the reactor size for a given thermal output. All in all, it's pretty great. So layering them in multiples will increase the amount of neutrons reflected, although in my opinion, I only do it out to 3 because then the benefits start tapering off after that. And then as you'll see, let me see, is any of them depleted yet? There we go. They will deplete over time. As a uranium fuel pellet, once it reaches 100% depleted, it will turn into a depleted uranium fuel pellet, which is good or bad, depending on how you want it. As I mentioned in the previous episode, you can take that depleted uranium and combine it with regular enriched uranium, and it will form breeder reactor fuel, so you can get some more power out of it. I don't personally use depleted regular uranium because I turn it all into breeder reactor fuel right away, but that's a point for the next episode. So, as mentioned in the previous episode, you can pipe the fuel in through the top of the reactor fuel cores, And as you can see through Wayla, they will heat up to 100 degrees Celsius, actually above it, and then they'll heat this central steam boiler to 100 degrees Celsius, which, as you can see, is consuming water, cooling down, and producing steam. That's how fission reactors produce steam. Unlike high-temperature gas reactors, you do not need a heat exchanger and all these multiple coolant loops. You can just directly turn heat into steam, which is pretty nice. So the other fuel is plutonium. So if you'll notice, things got pretty toasty up to about 200 degrees Celsius. But let's see what happens with plutonium, because, well, there's two fission fuels. So take all the uranium out. And let's see. Alright. Then put the plutonium fuel in. I am wearing a hazmat suit. If you are handling plutonium or nuclear waste or anything that's radioactive, you want either plutonium. You don't want plutonium as your armor. That's bad. You want either a hazmat suit or some sort of special armor. The only one I know of is draconic armor. Technically Wyvern would work, but the shield would die super fast. I heard the Avaricia armor is really strong and works specially, so I'm not sure if that would work. I haven't played with Avaricia. But as you'll notice, the reactor fuel cores are heating up a lot. And so the steam boiler is heating up a lot and is producing a whole lot more steam at once. That's good. But note, if you can't vent as much heat, excuse me, if you can't vent as much heat, it can lead to a meltdown, because as you can see here, it's getting up to 300 degrees Celsius. So if you have a large fission reactor, do not just switch it over from uranium to plutonium and be like, awesome, this will work great. Really? Let's see, we'll just do this. And now it works better. But as you'll notice, this plutonium fuel pellet, although it's been running for such a short period of time, is already 3% depleted. So plutonium burns faster and hotter, which means it'll produce more neutrons and more heat, but it does not last as long as uranium, and it has another side effect. It produces more nuclear waste. Now, nuclear waste is bad because nuclear waste will slow down the reactions, decreasing the heat output of the reactor, and it's just bad overall, and you're going to have to take care of it. In this episode, we're just going to talk about how to remove it from the fuel cores. So you can remove depleted uranium and nuclear waste out through the bottom. Well, like I said, we'll talk about the nuclear waste in another episode. And then depleted uranium, you can do whatever you feel like with that, including toss it into the void. Plutonium, when it 100% depletes, the pellet just disappears. Nothing else comes out of it. So you don't have to worry about, what do I do with depleted plutonium? I don't think that's a real thing that happens with nuclear reactors, because I think most isotopes of plutonium are either fissionable or fissile. Whatever, it doesn't matter. So it produces more heat. So here's a couple of pointers I want to make sure people know. Number one, steam boilers. You can put 3 things in them: water, heavy water, and ammonia. Regular water is what I'm using right now. Heavy water, there's an achievement for it. I'm not quite sure what it does yet. I haven't tested it. I'll cover that in an exotic cooling episode or something. And ammonia is like regular water, but it, depending on which turbine you use, it produces either 50% or 2 times the amount of power per heat. So it's pretty great. Note, I could put steam boilers all around the fuel core, but that would be very inefficient, because rarely, if at all, would they heat up to 100 degrees Celsius. Instead, the heat would sort of just wear off, like it does even now. So you would have all these reactions going on with no power output. That is very bad. So you want to make sure that your heat output, your fuel cores and your steam boilers are very balanced. As you get into larger and larger and larger fission reactors, it does become more and more difficult to do, but I'm sure you can do it. I'll cover a larger design in one of the final episodes on fission reactors, so I can show off some of what I've done. That design has also exploded lots of times, so you might want to do a little bit of testing on your own to make sure you understand how it works. But that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and bye.